All right, so the live stream is starting. Let's just take a look. We have 17, we should have 18 at the moment.
Yeah.
Matt, were you able to find your camera? All right, so the live stream is starting. Let's just take a look. We have 17, we should have 18 at the moment.
Is everybody else hearing that?
That was
Replay.
very delayed, actually.
Delayed. Yeah, it was a delayed playback. So
Live stream is starting.
The live stream is starting.
17, we should have.
I wonder, Tony, are you on the phone with the person? I wonder if we're getting the feedback.
No, I'm.
No, that was
Yeah, that could be.
Yeah, I fixed it.
Josh, Brent just emailed me and said he still didn't get anything from your email.
I'll send it again. You
Okay,
Are you hearing feedback from me?
No.
we're getting on to about 10 minutes past time. If we can get started with a few of these things, we'll kind of go through. And if we need to, we can do that. We can see if, Josh, if you can get a hold of Mr. Lightfoot via phone, perhaps, and figure this out, that would be helpful. Or if Ursula or somebody can text with him, that would be good.
I am, yes.
Okay. Well, in the meantime, let's go ahead and get started since we are at 6:40. I call to order the Oswego Community Unit School District 308 Virtual Board of Education meeting. Can I have a roll call?
Mr. Bauman,
Here.
Mrs. Doyle,
Here.
Mrs. Kroner,
Here.
Mr. Lightfoot, Miss Morgan,
Here?
Mrs. Moyer,
Here.
Mrs. Swanson.
Here.
Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. With liberty and justice for all. Apologize. I'm assuming that everyone else's was off mute. Mine was on. And I just realized it at the end. I apologize. Okay, so we have no public comment this evening, so we can move right on to item 5.1, board member comments. Who would like to begin? I can't tell if there's no board member comment, or are we trying to hit mute?
I think we're all trying to be polite. I'll go ahead and go.
Okay.
I just want to say that I know my children are very excited for it to really be the last week of school. And I'm sure many people are feeling that same way, that we've kind of run a marathon lately, but I don't think the race is over yet. I do want to acknowledge all of our, not just the 5th graders moving on to 6th grade who are missing out on some fun year-end activities and recognitions, and also our 8th graders who will be moving on to high school, same thing there. But especially our high school seniors and their families who I know are struggling right now. And I just want to acknowledge our administration for working really hard and both our district administration as well as our high school administration, and how they're really trying to make as much as we're allowed to have happen for these kids. And I know that graduation and canceling prom and celebrations and all these things, it sucks. It's certainly something they'll never forget, but I don't know if they'll remember it in a positive way or not. And I just appreciate the efforts to try and accommodate everybody. And I'm sure you're getting hundreds of emails expressing opinions on how things should be done on very broad spectrum. And I just appreciate trying to work hard to make it as good of an experience as you possibly can, and knowing that it's not ideal and it's probably not going to be ideal. And that things are continuing to change even every day with new announcements from the governor, and that you're trying to work around that, but still give families something to plan.
Just got it now. I'm trying to get in.
Oh, we hear you, Brent. And really that's all
No, I'm good. Thanks.
All right, anybody else have anything they'd like to add?
I will. Can we also remember that although we're all very frustrated, not to take it out on your administration at your buildings or your teachers or your people when you're going out for Mother's Day for food? I think it's important to remember to be kind, especially now. That's all. My kid's super excited to be done.
Anyone else? All right, I'd like to make sure that we don't lose track of the very exciting thing, which is that kids are going to be done with another year. And even though it's a very strange end of year and it's not what we want, it's not what any of us want, it is still something to celebrate. So I hope that everyone in their homes is able to provide a celebration for their students on completing the very first remote distance learning year that we've ever had. That's something to be proud of, and it's been a big challenge, but I know that all of our kids have been working really hard to still learn and to still grow, and I know that all of our staff has too. So I would ask if everyone can take some time to make sure they celebrate their students. This is still a big deal to be the end of the year, and frankly, I'm also very excited to be soon done with homeschool assistant teaching. And I do think that we will have a good time this summer, despite things looking different than we planned. I'd also like to congratulate our graduates, our 5th graders, our 8th graders, but most importantly, our high school seniors. This isn't what we would want. This isn't what anybody wants. So I appreciate all of our administration taking the time to go through the plans as thoroughly as they can, giving as much opportunity to maintain some of the key points that people are hoping for. While it's nothing that we want, it's a plan that's more open than other districts, and I really do appreciate our administrators for working so hard to come up with that. One of the things that I'm a little sad about is that we won't have an opportunity to celebrate our retirees this year and our employees who are celebrating their 25th anniversary. And I don't want to lose sight of the fact that we are losing a lot of good people to retirement this year. Most notably, I'd like to make sure that we recognize Mr. Wayne finishing his final year as principal at OHS. And I want to express my gratitude to him that we are going to miss him greatly, and we have appreciated everything that he has given to our community for the last 14 years. But for right now, that's all I have. And so we can go, unless anyone has anything additional, to item 5.2, board committee reports.
I think that's just me.
Yes, I believe that that's just finance.
Yep, we had a finance and facilities meeting, a virtual finance and facilities meeting on May 5th. And that was relatively successful for being a virtual meeting. Pretty good attendance, so that was good. We had Bob Lewis presented some of our options for refinancing some of our bonds that have been issued that are coming due. And he presented 4 different options on how to do that. And there were lots of questions by the committee. And the committee as a whole had asked if he could come back and present a couple more options based on some of the questions and comments that they had had. And so we're going to try and squeeze in another meeting end of May, beginning of June, so that we can go over those as a committee prior to making any kind of presentation to the board. I'm not sure, we don't have that scheduled yet though. So, and then they also had a lot of questions. Christy presented, and we're going to get an updated presentation tonight, I see, from her on the cash flow update. And there were a lot of questions after that, but most of those were in regards to the transition program. And I refer them to our last board meeting where we did talk about some of the plans that we're trying to put forward for that. And then we just talked about how we have no idea what the beginning of the school year next year is going to look like. But we are actively working to find a solution for that program that is running out of space. They were very concerned about that. And what else? I did take a bunch of notes. And yeah, that was, I mean, for a quick rundown of that meeting, that was, those are the 2 main topics that we talked about. But like I said, we are going to try and have another committee meeting end of May, beginning of June, to go over some other options for those bond refinancing.
And just to clarify, Ruth, this is that we
Yeah.
may have an opportunity to refinance some of our debt service bonds to
Correct.
lower interest rates.
Yes, that is correct. And potentially significantly lower interest rates, hopefully, based on the numbers that he was giving us. So
Did they record that meeting?
I believe so.
Okay, so is it up on the district website?
I'll check on that,
Chris-
Ally.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you.
Ruth, I have a question, if you may.
Uh-huh.
In the conversation about refinancing those debt service bonds at a lower rate, at what time frame was the extension? How far out would they have to be extended?
Right, so from how I was reading it, it didn't look like extending the time frame like to a later date, just changing the numbers in between, if that makes sense. All of the documents that he presented to us were emailed out.
And I agree. I don't think he was extending in any of the 4 options that he presented, but that was one of the request of the committee members was to look at extending it further.
I would just say that while, you know, we do want to make sure that our committees are able to look at these things, I'm a little hesitant to spend too much money on any particular direction further with his services until we've had a chance to look through what the topic is as a board as a whole. And you said that you're looking to have this scheduled in the beginning or the end of May, beginning of June. It looks like our next meeting is June 8th. Perhaps we can have instead Mr. Lewis come to discuss that at our next meeting for information. And then we can, as a board, provide a little more direction on which scenarios we'd like to have the finance committee look through further.
And I just wanted to clarify, we don't pay for his service except through, he gets paid when we do a bond issuance. So we don't pay like an hourly rate for Mr. Lewis's services.
Thank you for the clarification on that. All right. Thank you very much.
Yep.
Item 6, approval of consent agenda. Unless there's any questions, can I have a motion to approve?
I make a motion to approve all items under consent, including 6.1 minutes from the April 27th, 2020 Board of Education meeting, open and closed session, and 6.2 to acknowledge the FOIA request received by the district.
Second.
Mrs. Croner,
Aye.
Mrs. Croner, Mr. Lightfoot,
Aye.
Mrs. Moyer,
Aye.
Mr. Bauman, Mr. Bauman,
Aye.
Mrs. Swanson,
Aye.
Mrs. Doyle,
Aye.
Miss Morgan.
Aye.
Motion passes 7-0. Item 7.1.
Item 7.1 is in regards to our monthly financial statements. Does the board have any questions regarding any of the information presented in item 7.1? All right, hearing none, we'll move to item 7.2. It's a draft calendar for the 2021 Board of Education meetings. What questions does the board have in regards to the draft that has been presented?
I'm going to start by adding in that we are, as we did last year, going to be scheduling a board retreat, very likely for the end of June, as we did last year, so that we can develop our board priorities for the following year. This is just for our regularly scheduled meetings. We'll announce our board retreat at the regular time once we have that scheduled and we have everyone's availability together.
Do you want to do it in June, or do you want to wait until we find out what happens with the pandemic?
Well, right now we're going to need to look at it in June because we do need to have some direction for the beginning of the new fiscal year, July 1st. And we want them to start off going in the direction we need. The information at this point, I think we all have to work under the premise that it is going to continue to change as it's changed over the last several weeks when everyone thought they had a direction. So we'll need to kind of have a general way we would like to go so that we can provide direction to administration and do our part of the responsibility of school governance. And, we'll have to just kind of keep working at it and see where we are.
Lori, typically the number of people at a board retreat would be within the 10-person limit. Is that correct?
Well, it's
If
an
we do it
open
in
meeting.
person?
I think
Right.
at this point we wouldn't, just because our number
Growth.
just to have the people there that we would need would be higher than the 10. There's a possibility, depending on how things go, that this could be in person, but I don't think at this point we would plan for that.
So you're thinking this will just be another virtual meeting?
Very likely,
Like
much
this,
as
okay.
we did last year in person, probably on a Saturday. And again, this is something that we have to kind of look at our own schedules and see. So this is when we'll start looking at those, I hope, and I'll send out the survey to see who's available for which weekend. And we'll just go through, we'll take I think last year we had a 3.5-hour window. Perhaps, I can't remember if it was 3.5 or 4, but we'll go through there and just lay out the priorities much as it went last year. I mean, if we can be in person, I think that would be preferred, obviously, but if we're not able to, then we're not able to. But that is, again, an open meeting.
Any other questions regarding item 7.2? All right, hearing none, we'll move on to item 7.3 under information is a food service contract extension. Christie?
Thank you. So last year, as you know, we went out to bid and we approved the contract last year, a new contract last year. Every year, the board must approve the extension of that contract. We can extend it for 4 times after the initial approval. Our contract does specify that the increase would go up by CPI every year, which is 2.3%, as we know. Prior to this approving this contract or receiving this contract, my team and I did meet with Aramark to discuss some concerns about staffing levels. So going forward, beginning in when we go back to school, they will include with their monthly invoice a staffing report so that we can monitor that and make adjustments to the invoice as needed. Are there any other questions I can answer about the food service contract?
I don't have any questions, but I would like to thank Aramark for the work that they've been doing over the course of our remote distance situation. And they've been providing food for the kids for breakfast and lunch for any student that asks 5 days a week for the last couple months. And I want to make sure that I acknowledge that and thank them for the extra work that their staff has put into this and just for helping our kids out.
Now I'll pass it along. That will mean a lot to them. Thank you.
All right, item 7.4 is a custodial and maintenance supply bid. This is an annual bid for consumables. Christie?
Yep. So we released a bid in April for the items that are listed here. The quantities listed are estimates. These are only for bidding purposes only, and they're based on past trends. We would only be required to purchase, what we actually need. 7 vendors submitted bids on various items, and we are awarding the bid to 5 different vendors based on their price on individual items. So Rob and his team looked at, reviewed the bids and looked for the lowest price per item, so that way we realize the greatest savings. Are there any questions about the custodial supply bid?
All right, item 7.5 is a resolution request for the release of Kendall County land cash funds. Christie?
Yep, so this is our annual request for the Kendall County to release the developer fees that they collect on unincorporated property. This year, the amount is just over $5,600. And because this is just more of a formality, we are bringing this also for action tonight also. Any questions about the Kendall County land cash?
This is a very small amount, if I remember correctly. This is just for unincorporated. Can you refresh all of us on the kind of dollar amount we're talking about?
It's $5,600, so
Thank you.
just over 56, right? So it is all the unincorporated properties. Anything that's incorporated are bound by the municipality or the village's rules that they fall into, that they are the borders that they're in.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Item 7.6 is in regards to the sale of property, Wolf Crossing and the frontage on Stone Hill. Christie?
Yep. So the sales agreement actually expired May 6th. The purchaser is still very interested in that property and developing that corner. They've asked us for a 60-day due diligence. They're working with the owners of the adjoining properties to close, to finalize those sales. So we do expect this to come to a close at some point, but they are asking for this 60-day extension. And again, because of the timing, we're bringing this for action also.
All right, item 7.7 is the financial cash flow update. Christie?
Yep. Ursula will bring that up for us. So this is current as of May 6th. So we'll start on the left-hand side. The first three, First Midwest Bank, Pushcoin, and PMA. Whoops, you're scrolling too much. Go down a little bit, Ursula. There you go. So as far as liquid cash right now, we have about 11.9 million. We're estimating about $500,000 in outstanding checks. As of today, we have not received our first installment for May for evidence-based funding, but we do expect to get that on time. The accounts payable that you're approving today is just over $1 million. And you can see we're estimating again 7.1 in payroll. And I did put in May, this is a little different than what I presented at the Finance and Facility Committee meeting. I did put some tax receipts coming in May because we do know we are expecting to receive those based on everything we're hearing from the counties, that they do receive the escrow payments automatically in May. So last year we received about 11 million. So I'm being conservative and guessing or estimating about 5 million. So that will put us through that first June payroll. And that is the one that we were a little bit nervous about going below zero, but we will get through that payroll at about, and have about approximately 2.1 million afterwards. Then going down, I put in again about 75%. I'm estimating 75% of our tax receipts to be our normal tax receipts, which is about 51 million normally. So minus the 5 and take out the 25%, we're around 33.6. We are repaying a portion of our TAW. We did reach out to the 4 lenders, the 3 townships and Plainfield School District. Plainfield is not comfortable at this time committing to extending that due date, given, you know, they of course are also watching their the county tax collections and things like that. The due date is not until July 31st, but we're thinking we can save some interest and pay that earlier by the end of June. So we'll end fiscal year, again, cash balance, 32 million. That's different than our fund balance because remember, we accrue back payroll expenses and things like that. Going over onto the right side now into the first quarter of fiscal year 21, as a reminder, in July, we don't receive any evidence-based funding, so you won't see that there, but we will get some residual tax receipts coming in. Then in August, we begin to receive evidence-based funding again. We're leaving it status quo for now. That's hopefully where we'll end, given everything we're hearing about evidence-based funding and, you know, the reduction in Illinois, the state's revenue sources also. So going down into by the end of September, the end of first quarter, we expect to have about 31.4 million because again, we'll start receiving the second installment of tax revenue. So if this plays out, and we'll watch it very closely, of course, we may be able to get through to that September, October without issuing additional TAWs. And again, I've noted there that the township treasurers, the 3 township treasurers have agreed to extend that July 31st due date for their portion of our current TAWs to October 31st. So we'll be bringing motions to the board next week. I'm sorry, at the next board meeting to formalize that extension. Any questions on the cash flow?
Christy, for FY21, the estimates related to the tax receipts, is that also with the 25%? Is that including the 25% reduction? Or
yes, and that could be a little bit higher because we hope to receive some of those first installment because most of the counties are. And if can you scroll up a little, Ursula? There you go. So I've put a chart here what the counties are, the extension dates that they're giving. Will County, I don't know that they voted on it, but that's what they're proposing to their full board is a 90-day extension, which would put it to September 1st. So we do think that, you know, we could receive, given those extension dates, we could receive pretty significant tax receipts throughout the entire summer, actually. I've only got them in those 2 places, but given these dates, we could receive them pretty steadily throughout the summer. But yes, that is reduced by 25% also.
Thank you.
Any other questions for item 7.7?
Is there
Christine, you
any
mentioned that we-
conversation?
Whoops, sorry.
But
Sorry,
Go ahead.
go ahead, Matt. Go ahead.
is there any conversation out in your world regarding the EBF payments? Any realization that they actually will come through on time? The state is in a position where they will actually be funding the schools
Yeah.
appropriately and on time?
So the appropriateness is the question. Even in the times before, with all the proration of general state aid, that is one thing you can count on, is receiving those payments steadily. They always made those two payments. They may have been late with the MCATs, but they always made those two every month. It's the amount that the state is going to be able to allocate to evidence-based funding next year that's in question. So at this point, I would say best case scenario is that we would remain flat. Worst case is that it would impact, they would, I don't want to say prorate, because the way the formula is written, it wouldn't be an across the board proration as it has been in the past. There's a mechanism if the state does not fully fund evidence-based funding. And luckily, because we're in a tier 1, we would feel the least impact, but we probably would feel some impact. So again, best case scenario is that it would remain flat for next year. I mean, that's what we're, what I'm hearing in my world, if you will.
Is there any concern? You mentioned that we have not received the first May payment yet. Is there?
No, that usually comes in, and actually, if I checked, we may have gotten it today. Actually.
Today? Okay.
But yeah, it usually comes around the 10th or the 11th. So,
Okay.
yeah, I'm not concerned.
Any other questions regarding item 7.7? All right, Christy, thank you for that update. Appreciate it.
Yep.
All right, item 7.8 is revised graduation requirements for class of 2020 due to COVID-19. The governor passed an executive order that provides flexibility in high school graduation requirements for the class of 2020. So tonight we're going to share some of our recommendations regarding these changes and to enable as many of our seniors to move on as possible. So with that, Faith, why don't you take it from there?
Great, thank you, Dr. Sparlin. As Dr. Sparlin said, back on April 24th, the governor released a requirement and the flexibility for some of the graduation requirements in the state. Like many other districts, our graduation requirements are a little different than the state, and they also relaxed some of the pieces for local control regarding those requirements. This is a difficult decision and things to make because we're proud of the high graduation requirements that we have, but we also want to be very careful that we are not causing harm through these pieces of remote learning to have those graduation requirements. So in the documents that you have here, we are going a little bit lower than what we usually do, but not quite as low as what the state has had in these different areas. And this would allow us, for those students that were struggling during remote learning and might have done better during a class where it was face-to-face or had the structure of school, this would allow our students to still graduate and meet those requirements. I do have just a little bit of new information even since 5 o'clock. One of the large survey tools that we use, CADCA, released some survey results that they had done of districts that also had gone through and already gone through this process and lowered their graduation requirements. There are still several districts like ours that are in the process, but these are the ones that I know of so far. Palatine, Elmhurst, U46, East Aurora, Naperville 204, Lyons Township, Maine, Valley View, Oak Lawn, Wakanda, Carpentersville, Huntley, and Proviso have already lowered their graduation requirements in line with the state also suggesting that we lower the graduation requirements because of the possible hardships of participating through remote learning. So the recommendations that are there, and do we have questions at this time?
So basically what this is allowing for is if there are any students who may potentially be getting an incomplete for this second semester, they would still be able to graduate, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Thank you for getting back to me earlier today. My concern with, and I can appreciate that we want our requirements higher than the state of Illinois. But my concern was the little caveats in the notes. For instance, there was one credit that must be a biological science and one credit that must be a physical science. And the state of Illinois wants 1.5 credits, but they don't require which section of science. And to me, science is about learning and growing and finding things out and figuring out how to solve problems. I don't care if they've passed one full year of biology before they go on to chemistry. You don't need biology for chemistry and you don't need chemistry for physics. Is it nice to have? Sure, but it's more of a process question for me.
Right,
So,
and in meeting with high school administration and high school staff, that they felt strongly about having those order of how we take them as students. But you are correct that the caveats that are there, that it must be a biological science and then a physical science, is an Oswego requirement, not a state requirement.
right, so
The same would be said for partial of social studies. The 1.0 credit must be United States history or 0.5 US history and civics. That is a state requirement, but the requirement above it, the 1.0 must be modern world history, is a Oswego suggested requirement.
right, so I don't know that, first of all, how many kids does that affect if we have those added in there versus if we take those out? And then my second question, I guess more to the point, would be, is there legal recourse for families if our standards somehow are stopping graduation? Since the state of Illinois has changed its graduation requirements, what is the legal recourse for those kids who it would affect?
I would defer to our attorney, but my sense is that since our requirements are different throughout the year that are higher than the state, that same availability would be here. And were very specific in the governor's order that the requirements still remain at local control.
I think I understand what your,
your.
I think I understand what your concern is, Ally, and my question would be, how many seniors would these caveats affect? Like, I think modern world history, most students take that as a freshman. So I understand, like, that's a requirement, but potentially there aren't really any seniors who would maybe be getting an incomplete in that.
Unless they failed it.
Unless they failed it and are taking it again.
Right.
Some of the discussions, like you'll see for health, we didn't go back and change that health requirement because that's a class that's taken much earlier than your senior year. And that's some of the logic that was followed with science and social studies requirements that are there, because those aren't classes that seniors would be taking. Those would have been taken in earlier years, and we didn't want to back up and give credit for courses that wouldn't have happened during remote learning.
Right, and I may be the only one sitting on the board who thinks that, but I don't think we should have the math, science, and social studies caveats on there, the notes.
I would ask, if we do not, what percentage or how many students are we looking at that, if these standards are not lowered, are going to risk not being able to graduate this year?
So I have run some of the numbers, and I'll share with that in just a minute, but I also want to caution the board when I tell you that it's 70 students at each of our high schools are in danger of not making those requirements. We always, at this time of the year, have quite a few students that are waiting till the last minute to get the assignments in, to get things done. How am I going to do on that last test or that assignment? And this year, The deadline is even further out than what it would be usually now because we've given some extended time since graduation is later. We also gave more time to do that. So right now it's about 70 at each of those schools, but we do anticipate that as students find out about deadlines and get those things in place, we would have more students pass. This still would go down on their transcript, that it was an incomplete or that other things, and there will still be a reason to improve and get better on this, even if we change the graduation requirements.
So, but
So I
how
have a
many,
slightly
so
different,
70 at each high school if we keep the 1 credit? The notes on each of those?
Those aren't specific to those individual classes. I have not had time to go back and through and look at just at those caveats, but a lot of those are not classes that students are taking as seniors. So I don't think there would be that much of an impact in the change because the classes that are listed there are classes that would have already happened.
Right, but so here's my concern. So if a student fails biology, do we have them retake biology until they pass it? Or are we letting them move on to chemistry or physics or science?
With our high schools, we'd have to go through, I think most people repeat biology and take other courses and do credit recovery to get that to be able to go into their other science classes. And I did want to add that the math statements that are there, the 1.0 credit must be algebra and the 1.0 credit must be a course that includes geometry. That is a requirement that was still in place from the state. That is not an add for Oswego.
so just to add a couple of comments, and my take might be slightly different here. So obviously we all understand that things are very different in a remote learning environment. But I keep going back to the fact that under the state guidelines and under the guidelines that the district is using, students who are already enrolled in spring semester can't risk getting a lower grade than what they had when we started remote learning. And so that leads me to believe that where we're talking about students in risk, we're actually not talking necessarily about students who now may have additional financial obligations to their families or other things going on, or they've had to temporarily relocate out of the area. It says that there were things that they weren't getting done before remote learning. And I'm encouraged hearing you, Mrs. Dahlquist, talk about how extending the deadline, working with kids to understand when things have to be turned in no later than by. I guess I'm reluctant to lower the graduation requirements when getting a diploma from SD308 is something you earn, not something you should be given.
I would like to add a comment to that, Brent, because it's my understanding that while their grades can't go down, they could potentially get an incomplete if they are not engaging or participating in any way in their course. So if they're doing zero work and have zero check-ins and, whatever is the teacher has set up to do their attendance and, like daily question or whatever it is, all teachers are doing different things to engage in the students or going on their Google Hangouts, and they could potentially still get an incomplete, but that means they're just not engaging at all, like totally. And I don't know how much of that is happening. I feel like from what I have seen and heard that most students, a significantly high percentage of students are engaging in their classrooms.
I was going to say, I know that teachers and schools are contacting high school students weekly if they're not checking in. And so I think we're going above and beyond and giving students the opportunity to say, hey, I've got some family issues. I've got some life issues. This is what's happening. Can I ask for X, Y, and Z? And I'm not saying that, I'm not trying to apply blanket statements here. I'm just saying in general terms, I feel we're giving the same ability to support, well, not same ability, but we're giving the same leeway to support students who need it. And we're willing to accommodate on a case-by-case basis if needed. What I'm trying to get at is that student who's purposely decided to check out and not do anything and has no real reason for doing that other than to say, I don't wanna, there's got to be consequences for that action. That's all I'm saying.
There are none.
So I think the question is, does the, we brought this as information, does the board agree with lowering the requirements, or do we leave them as is? I think you've heard some good comments on both sides of that, so it's really 100% up to the 7 of you.
My thought on this is that I actually think that we really do need to, only because the distance learning took place at the middle of a semester where some kids might not yet have caught on to the subject if they were starting something new, or they didn't have a chance even to finish a unit. I think that this gives them a fair chance. I'm not real thrilled with the thought that students who might be on the bubble would choose to take this opportunity to not hold themselves accountable. And I would hope that these students chose to model the good character that we've been trying to instill in them in 308 as well throughout the years. But I do think that there are enough students that this is going to catch that have circumstances beyond their control that none of us could have foreseen even March 10th. That this feels appropriate to me. I do think it brings up a few questions that I'd like to discuss for going forward for our requirements versus the state's requirements for different situations, including the different sciences and things. But for this discussion, for this situation in this semester only, yes, I agree with this reduction.
I agree, Lori. I think it's I think we're striking a balance in terms of needing to make some accommodations, but continuing to keep our standards, on the higher end, but really acknowledging that that this will hopefully help some kids that have potentially struggled and couldn't quite bounce back in the same way as if they were in attendance in this kind of this last semester. So I agree with what's proposed.
My turn yet?
Yes.
Okay. I understand the thought behind this. As we say, we're about 70 students at each high school that this may affect. I would have hoped by now at this point, those kids that are that close to the bubble going through this process, if I would, before even consider approving this, how much effort has been provided to those students to make sure that they are engaged? What else could they have done to get to this point to make sure that they're not going to fail that last science class or that last math class that's going to prohibit them from graduation? I would rather have seen more effort or see more effort put forth to those 140 kids in this entire district that face not graduating at this point. How can we help them to exceed and get to that point rather than just lowering the bar on what our expectations are? That's
Yeah,
my perspective.
I hear what you're saying, but I feel like that some of what I heard, like a lack of that, like I think I would be careful, I guess, with kind of that statement related to effort on behalf, the effort or lack of effort from our staff, our teachers, and our administrators. I hear what you're saying, and I agree with the sentiment that. I agree with the sentiment, but I think that idea that there was a lack of effort, it's a pretty strong statement.
I think it also
Well,
leaves
I
out
mean,
the social emotional
I
piece.
think everything is sure, it's left to interpretation. And I'm
Right.
not saying that there's not staff, there's not anybody that's not putting forth an effort. I'm just saying if those kids have been focused on, or what else could have been focused on for those individual students, rather than lowering the expectations for everybody. That's my only statement. I'm not saying that their teachers are not doing their job. Nobody's putting forth an effort. However, we have learning plans in place for students throughout the course of the year. And I think as different as the last couple of months have been and as strenuous as they have been, there are still certain expectations that we should have.
And there are also services we are not providing.
My thoughts are I'm not one for lowering the bar either. And I agree that a degree from District 308 is something to be earned, but I also think I can't put myself in these kids' shoes. I have no idea what their circumstances are. I have no idea who they are or what's going on. They don't live in my house, and I don't know their parents. I don't know their situation, and I would hate to pass judgment on somebody else when I really don't know. And I don't think that we can take this on a case-by-case basis and say, well, we've determined that you're just lazy, and so we're decided we're going to keep you to these standards, but this kid over here is truly under a hardship and just it wasn't going to happen, and it's extraordinary circumstances, and so we're going to lower the standard for you. We have to set it for everybody, and I think most of the kids are already going to meet these SD308 graduation requirements of 4 years of English, 3 years of math. Like, the majority of the kids are already there. They're not going to suddenly this week stop doing their work and being like, oh, sweet, now I don't have to do it because the board said, I don't need that half a credit. No, they're still going to do it. And it's going to be on their transcript, and they'll go off to whatever higher education or employment that they were going to anyway. I think this affects a really small number of students, but I think it's an important number that we can't just say, well, we think you didn't put enough effort. And for some of them, I'm sure that is the case. They just don't care. But for those who do care, but they just couldn't, I think we need to make that exception for them at this time. Hopefully that made sense.
I'm wondering if Faith could maybe though highlight some of what is done for those 7. Obviously you're looking at data, and we know they have around 70 at each high school, and what kind of efforts are made and related to getting getting these kids to where they need to be. I'm wondering if you could share some of that, Faith.
Sure. So for any of the students that have gone, longer than a week without touching base, there are personal phone calls that are made. We've also, for those people that are in danger of failing these classes, some of our staff and admin have even done wellness visits. There have been repeated phone calls to parents, notifications to the students and to the parents about you're in danger of this requirement. And there's still more of that even to come. And some of those deadlines are still a few weeks out, and our staff is continuing to work with parents and students to get this work in so that they can make those requirements. I know that there in some of the courses have been even, well, if you can't prove you can't do the activity this way, what is a different way that you could show the that you have this knowledge, and providing those different ways to prove the assessment pieces. I know that some people were having technical issues. We provided hotspots and devices, but a little later into the semester than within the first couple of weeks. So some of those students were having to play catch up during remote learning because they didn't have access to technology or to the internet until we found out about that. And then in some cases drove hotspots and devices to people's homes. There have been some other times where we've had lost communication for a couple of weeks and have now regained that and are working with families on what that would look like. So I can't speak to all of the staff, but I have heard some pretty amazing stories of our staff and administration going the extra mile. I won't embarrass the person, but we did have a family that was considered homeless and had been moved far away for this. And we had an administrator and a counselor that drove many miles outside of the district to provide paper copies to this family so that they could still communicate and get their pieces in to be able to finish courses. And then they're working at taking a picture of the assignment and sending it back for it to be graded. So there are some amazing things that our staff have been doing to try to engage with these students.
I think it's also important to remember this is one graduating class. We're not redoing the entire requirement for the entire district.
Tony, Brenna, anything else to weigh in on this?
Did you ask me, Lori?
Yes.
No, I'm fine with understanding that we have to have different requirements this year. I agree with Allie that it's not forever. And, you know, I think people are doing the best they can. It's an exceptional situation. And if anything, we'll raise them next year and make up the difference that way.
I'd like to just add in at the end that, again, that this is one of those opportunities that during our last meeting, we had voted to suspend board policies, that this was not a requirement to bring before the board for our vote and our decision, but that this is something that our administration chose to maintain business as usual and utilize board governance as they ought to. So thank you for that. Unless there's anything else, I think I'm hearing support, Dr. Sparlin, for this new recommendation.
Okay, very good. If that's the case, Allie had the second question in regards to the items under the notes. I just wanted to make sure that was addressed because she asked the question.
Yeah, but I think some of that is for another day.
Okay, all right. I just wanted to make sure your question was addressed, Allie.
Yeah.
Okay, then hearing none, we can move on. Mrs. Doyle, thank you.
Whoops, I should remember to unmute. All right, action items. We're on item 8.1, approval of bills for payment. Any questions? Can I have a motion?
I make a motion to authorize the payment of bills in the amount of $1,043,245.32 as presented.
Second.
Mrs. Swanson,
Aye.
Mrs. Doyle,
Aye.
Miss Morgan,
Aye.
Mrs. Croner,
Aye.
Mr. Bauman, Mr. Bauman,
Aye.
Mrs. Moyer,
Aye.
Mr. Lightfoot.
Aye.
Motion passes 7-0. Item 8.2, approval of the bus trust lease agreement. Any questions? Can I have a motion?
I make a motion to approve the bus trust lease agreement with Midwest Transit Equipment Incorporated and Standard Leasing LLC as presented.
Second.
Miss Morgan,
Aye.
Mr. Lightfoot,
Aye.
Mrs. Doyle,
No?
Mrs. Swanson,
Aye.
Mr. Bauman,
No.
Mrs. Moyer,
Aye.
Mrs. Croner.
No.
Motion passes 4-3. Item 8.3. Can I have a motion?
I make a motion to approve bus service removal for parts of Southbury and Prairie Point based on the hazardous study conducted by Erickson Engineering.
Second.
Mrs. Doyle?
No, wait, I have a question.
Okay.
I never got answers to my question from last week. Can we
About-
pass off?
About the time?
Yep.
Yeah, I did get an email answer to that question. And she said that it was conducted during school drop off and pickup time. I could go back to find that. I do have some other questions and concerns about that, but I don't think any of my other questions would necessarily change my vote. Just, I think we need some further discussion about it, if that makes sense.
So do you want to pull it back off for information?
I believe that, I thought that the information, was that in the weekly update, Christy, or was that a separate email?
No, it was in the
Isn't that-
weekly update, and I think it's also, we updated the board memo that is included on this agenda item with that information.
When did you do that?
It would have been last week, I think.
I looked again earlier today.
Oh, there's not a board memo. Is there a board memo on this?
It's public comment, it says.
And the weekly
Or
update was
content.
Friday.
In the memo, it says that you confirmed with Erickson Engineering that the traffic patterns were observed during drop-off and pickup times for both schools.
Right.
And then I did have an additional question where I'd asked, and I ask it because I live in one of these neighborhoods, and so I know how kids get to school here. So that's why had asked questions specific to the Southbury. And my question had been where they were thinking the kids were going to cross at certain points, because it's a little tricky. And while there are crosswalks that I would be concerned if I had a small child, I wouldn't worry about 4th or 5th grader, but if I had a little kid, I would be concerned.
Christy, are you aware of the crosswalks that it's talking about? And if so, what is your plan with that?
So I am aware, and I know one of them, and I looked at Google Maps, so I know where that one is, and I believe that's one of them is where Southbury, I think it's Southbury, currently dead ends because they haven't extended the subdivision yet into that next plot of land. But I think Southbury is the one that we talked about potentially putting an additional crossing guard
Yes.
last week, right? Or last board meeting?
Yes.
So, and we
Yes.
can certainly do that. You
So
know,
I think where they're talking about them crossing, where the crosswalk is on the west side, not the dead end side. It just wasn't put in a great place. So the actual crosswalk is a divided area and there are cars turning and going through the intersection. If it had been on the east side where there's really hardly any traffic at all, and then it goes up onto a walking path, but where the walking path goes over on that Durham Lane, it ends like in the middle of the street, and there's not a crosswalk right there to get across the street to the side. Like there's like no sidewalk there. I don't know, it's
And
tricky.
I believe Dawn is with us, and she probably knows that area better. So Dawn, are you there?
Yes, good evening.
Hey, Todd.
Good evening. I did look, Ms. Croner, at your concern. I think that there is a walk path that we can get them to use crosswalks safely to the school. But I do understand your current concern about the Southbury and Colchester intersection, that the crosswalk is only on the west and not the east side. And that is a boulevard there with some grassy area in the center. So if there were consideration for an additional crossing guard, that may be where the crossing guard may need to go. But I believe that if they go up to the far side of, is it Durham? Durham, there's a crosswalk there. So they could cross on the far side and then cross onto the school property.
Yeah, I think I think there is a way that it could work. You will need to make sure you're clearly communicating to parents what the safe route is.
I have already reached out. Sorry, go ahead.
No, and then adding a crossing guard there at that Southbury Colchester intersection where it is that boulevard where it's divided would be very helpful, I think.
Right. And it's not a huge expense to add a crossing guard. So if that would make the parents more comfortable, we can definitely do that. And Dawn, you could say something else?
No, just that if we work with the building principal and assistant principal, I thought we could have a communication that could go out fairly soon to the parents, letting them know that the change is coming for next school year and giving them the recommended walk path, depending on what neighborhoods they were coming from. So I thought we could devise a walk path from each neighborhood.
Yep, that would be really appreciated, I'm sure. And I'm sure the Prairie Point parents would appreciate the same thing. I'm just not as familiar with their route.
Okay, I took some notes for that. We'll make sure that we add that into the process.
Thanks, Dawn.
You're welcome.
All right, so going back, does that answer all the questions that we have on 8.3? Okay, can I have a motion, please?
Okay, I make a motion to approve bus service removal for parts of Southbury and Prairie Point based on the hazardous study conducted by Erickson Engineering.
Second.
Mrs. Doyle,
Aye.
Miss Morgan,
Aye.
Mr. Lightfoot,
Aye.
Mrs. Moyer,
Aye.
Mrs. Croner,
Aye.
Mrs. Swanson,
Aye.
Mr. Bauman. Mr. Bauman,
Aye.
Motion passes 7-0. Item 8.4.
I make a motion to approve a resolution and request for the release of Kendall County land cash funds to Oswego Community Unit School District 308 in the amount of $5,621.19.
Second.
Mrs. Moyer,
Aye.
Mr. Lightfoot,
Aye.
Miss Morgan,
Aye.
Mrs. Swanson,
Aye.
Mrs. Croner,
Aye.
Mrs. Doyle,
Aye.
Mr. Bauman.
Aye.
Motion passes 7-0. Item 8.5.
I make a motion to approve the student's rights and responsibilities section in the student handbook for the 2020-21 school year as presented.
Second.
Mrs. Croner,
Aye.
Mrs. Swanson,
Aye.
Mrs. Doyle,
Aye.
Mrs. Moyer,
Aye.
Mr. Bauman,
Aye.
Mr. Lightfoot,
Aye.
Miss Morgan.
Aye.
Motion passes 7-0. Item 8.6.
I make a motion to approve the extension of the due diligence period in the real estate purchase and sale agreement with BSTP Midwest Incorporated through 5 p.m. on July 15th, 2020.
Second.
Mrs. Doyle,
Aye.
Miss Morgan,
Aye.
Mr. Lightfoot,
Aye.
Mrs. Moyer,
Aye.
Mrs. Croner,
Aye.
Mrs. Swanson,
Aye.
Mr. Bauman.
Aye.
Motion passes 7-0. Item 8.7, revised graduation requirements.
I make a motion to approve the revised graduation requirements for the class of 2020 due to COVID-19.
Second.
Miss Morgan,
Aye.
Mrs. Doyle,
Aye.
Mrs. Moyer,
Aye.
Mrs. Croner,
Aye.
Mr. Bauman,
No.
Mr. Lightfoot,
No.
Mrs. Swanson.
Aye.
I'm sorry, I did not hear that.
Aye.
Motion passes 5-2. Item 8.8, administrator contracts.
I'd like to make a comment before we take the vote, Madam President.
Please.
So this is an unfortunate timing and unfortunate activities, and we all know what's happening in society. Unfortunately, we just last Friday got news of the highest unemployment numbers since I've been alive and since most of us have been alive. And while I understand that we owe it to our administrators to renew their contracts, I personally cannot support any increase in salary at this time, given not only the fact that we have numbers of family members in District 308 that are out of work, looking for jobs. We have no real good numbers on understanding what percentage of the district may need to take advantage of delaying their property taxes because they can't pay them. That's money that the district uses to pay our salaries. And this is potentially more concerning than the downturn than we saw in 2008. Because of all these things, I mean, I would love to give our administrators some sort of a reward, be it monetary, for all the work that they and every member of this district is doing during this time. But I cannot support pay raises, and that's why I will be voting no on this today. Thank you.
Anybody else?
I agree with Brent.
Okay, thank you, Tony. I'm going to go, and I'll just make a brief statement also that for myself, I'm not looking at administrator contracts and changes to pay scale as a reward or anything, although all of our administration has been doing an exemplary job given what they had to work with this year in changing times. I'm looking at this as strictly a fair market value decision on a lot of our positions that have fallen so far behind that it can become challenging to fill the roles. And we know that we need leadership in our district, especially through times that are uncertain. And we need to make sure, in my opinion, that we price these positions in a way that will allow people to accept them. and I am significantly concerned for our finances and all of the concerns we have. However, this, particularly for some of these job categories, has been a change that we've needed to make for a long time. And if we do not put a start toward it, we're going to face some concerns for leadership for next year. Is there anyone else? Can I have a motion?
I make a motion to approve the administrator contracts for 2020-21 as presented.
Second.
Mrs. Croner,
Aye.
Mr. Lightfoot,
No.
Mrs. Moyer,
Aye.
Mr. Bauman,
Aye.
Mrs. Swanson,
No.
Mrs. Doyle,
Aye.
Miss Morgan.
No.
Motion passes 4-3. Item 8.9. Any questions? Can I have a motion?
Make a motion to approve the new district administrator contract as presented.
Second.
Second.
Miss Morgan,
Aye.
Mr. Lightfoot,
Aye.
Mrs. Doyle,
Aye.
Mrs. Swanson,
Aye.
Mr. Bauman,
Aye.
Mrs. Moyer,
Aye.
Mrs. Croner.
Aye.
Motion passes 7-0. Item 8.10. Can I have a motion?
I make a motion to approve the new building administrator contract as presented.
Second.
Mrs. Moyer,
Aye.
Mr. Lightfoot,
Aye.
Miss Morgan,
Aye.
Mrs. Swanson,
Aye.
Mrs. Croner,
Aye.
Mrs. Doyle,
Aye.
Mr. Bauman.
Aye.
Motion passes 7-0. Item
Hey.
8.11.
Can I ask you a quick question?
Sure.
When we did 8.9, 8.10, can we combine like I understand why you guys split personnel report and administrator contracts, but is there a need to do district level versus building level on administrator? Or can we just
Sometimes.
put those on one? Okay.
Can I have a motion?
I make a motion to approve the personnel report as presented.
Second.
Mrs. Swanson,
Aye.
Mrs. Moyer,
Aye.
Mr. Bauman,
Aye.
Mrs. Croner,
Aye.
Miss Morgan,
Aye.
Mrs. Doyle,
Aye.
Mr. Lightfoot.
Aye.
Motion passes 7-0. Can I have a motion to adjourn?
I make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Aye. All right, we are adjourned. Thank you, everybody.